Man, PlayStation really shot themselves in the foot this time. I'm Mr. J, and don't you just love not being able to own your own games? For those like myself and others in the gaming community who have a general understanding of the situation, it's no surprise why brands and the public are dogging on Sony with their recent announcements. But if you're not someone entirely involved in the gaming community, the basic gist of the situation is Sony is ending physical disc production in 2028 and starting the process of shutting down the PlayStation 3 Store across the globe and gradually removing service from those storefronts by the end of 2027. If you're wondering why that's a big deal, you can do a bit more research in your own time about the greater specifics of the situation, but for the most part, a lot of well-known video game and entertainment content creators, people in your life who have a vested interest in video games, and individuals like myself will focus on stuff like preservation, accessibility, and ownership. And that's kind of why people are royally pissed off about this whole situation. Though, since it wouldn't do me much good to talk about Sony and their whole fiasco thus far without mentioning a few people who have also discussed this as examples, here they are. Man Carrying Thing literally makes the point in his video, How Companies Act When You Own Physical Media, that this whole thing is Sony attempting to gain control over their consumers by taking away physical media and having us solely rely on their digital storefront to conduct purchases and consume media. And he's also pointing out the absurd nature of how our movies and shows that we bought can easily be deleted from our consoles without our consent because the arbitrary licensing deal between all these companies has your favorite series playing hot potato with 12 different streaming services and nobody knowing where it went, since almost all these dillweeds can't quell their greed for more than 5 minutes to figure out where the proverbial potato landed. Also adding to that, from what I can gather, Sony doesn't care that tons of DLC, games, and media is going to become lost media, untouchable, expensive to obtain from third-party sellers, or tough for people to mod and obtain freely. They just want total control over our buying habits, and that we are complicit with their future decisions. Then you'll look at things like Twitter brand accounts, and them making blatant jabs at Sony with their shift to digital pizza, chicken download codes, you wouldn't download fried chicken, Twinkies ending physical production, and so on, to show how asinine it is for a company mainly known for a physical product to shift towards removing that option. You can't just remove an avenue of purchase or accessibility and try to enforce that change onto the general public like they will comply with those demands without pushback. I'm not siding with the multi-billion-dollar corporations or businesses or their actions to make themselves look better publicly given the situation, but I'm enjoying how the guys running the ad campaigns and social media accounts are taking the piss out of Sony for doing something this moronic and foolhardy. It's like my dad always says, son, you can't sell digital chicken or pizza codes to people. No, I don't care if you're trying to corner the speculative food market. That's not a real job. You can't eat what doesn't exist, and this AI-generated, headless twerking chicken you wasted resources to prompt sure isn't gonna feed anyone, let alone us. Over on Planet Dolan's other channel, Dolan Darkest, he had a couple short videos talking about the Twitter backlash Sony's facing and how people are dogging on Sony repeatedly for how poorly they handled and are trying to sweep this entire controversy they created under the rug. The first one goes over the fact that major European Union countries are fighting Sony for developing a supposed monopoly for their digital storefront and the outrageous prices they're charging for digital-only games in places like France and the Netherlands. Then 4 days later, he made a follow-up to his other small video about Sony's moronic decision to shift away from physical discs, and how Sony is still getting a higher comment-to-like ratio, noting that people are angry and dissuaded by all the new games and ports Sony is trying to announce. Well, up until Sony announced a Call of Duty remaster where every socially unaware dingus who couldn't let go of their nostalgia for longer than a minute promptly showed off that if Sony aims at waving nostalgic titles, updated ports, and remastered versions of beloved games in the faces of certain people, that they could potentially weaken the ongoing boycott against themselves by finding the weak links and rendering the boycott dead in the water because some impulsive gamers couldn't practice better self-control. Looking at Mugthief and his feelings on the whole situation regarding Sony, he goes into a nuanced discussion of how having a PC helps to preserve games, as Steam and good old games can run your library offline and don't require digital rights management to execute them. Well, most of the time. How having physical games and proof of ownership is paramount to us, the customers, the player base, always being able to play those games without having access to them revoked or losing the opportunity to play them because an outside force renders the games inaccessible. How having proper accessibility to games or more options to buy, share, resell, or freely play that game gets vaporized the moment everything is funneled onto a digital storefront whose owners can dictate whether or not you can keep your games or even play them at all if your console isn't connected to the internet. It's a deep dive that's trying to make you understand that ownership is important, regardless of where it's from. And that if all we do is just roll over and show our tummy to Sony when the PlayStation 6 rolls around, we buy all their games like a good little doggy, that we don't freely express our discomfort or disdain and have those creature comforts unfairly taken away at a moment's notice, that our accessibility to those games and the reason for consumer rights existing goes up in smoke. Taking a gander over to senpapigabe's whole skit encapsulates the anger, the fear, and the frustration people invested or involved in gaming are all feeling as Sony is trying to put out the fire they made by making a burnt turd of a sandwich of a PR announcement. Like, I don't give a shit that their fight stick I'll never use can be easily swapped out, or that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, For the King 2, or Crosscoder PS Plus monthly games. They didn't do anything to address the situation, to quell people's fears, or to ease their tension in dire times. They're all looking out for their best interests, so that way they can make as much money as possible and then leave us holding the bag. And Gabe over here is just kind of showing that everyone is trying to make heads or tails of all of this and trying to get a straight answer out of Sony, but instead Sony is just trying to shift away from all of that, while all of their competitors and anyone who isn't in the gaming industry is taking advantage of the free pot shots and positive public perception they can gain at Sony's expense. And then there's Scott the Waz on Scott's Stash, as Scott goes into great length talking about how physical media is important, and how removed Sony is from their customer base on these matters. What's the point in buying a PlayStation 5, or 6 when it comes out, when Sony barely markets their games, barely releases more than 2 exclusive mainline titles on their consoles, and are looking to completely remove the secondary market from the equation, where Sony's desire to care more about profits over accessibility, preservation, developing better alternatives to keep their vast catalog of games and content around, will ultimately drive their fans, their customer base, to better sources and alternatives so they aren't wasting money on a return they'll never see. Why spend hundreds of dollars on a digital library if it can easily be gone tomorrow because of a licensing dispute, an account loss, or a royal snafu on Sony's end? And I agree with Scott because having a physical collection rocks because you have the freedom to access those games and to do whatever you want with them and experience them the way you want to without fear of deletion or removal. Your library of games is yours and should be yours, and Sony shouldn't be allowed to dictate how you use the games you paid for. Saying all of this, I really can't leave without sharing my 2 cents though. I can't speak for everyone because everybody's thoughts, feelings, opinions, and their agendas around this whole situation are going to be wildly different. And if you do share my thoughts, you do share my feelings and opinions on these matters, Well, hey, that's one person in my corner. But as for what I have to say, I really hate this. I don't know if it's been said, but it boils my blood with this whole situation because we're losing so many potential experiences for the regular consumers. Like, I saw the news. Insignios helped stoke a fire under my rear end to get this moving. But actually watching videos, actually seeing the games that we're going to lose, and seeing what the disc apocalypse is going to reap, I'm distraught. I never really knew about God of War Ascension, or Rain, or Tokyo Jungle, Yakuza Dead Souls, or Remember Me. Now when I'm faced with the fact that a lot of my PS3 collection has digital-only DLC for games like Infamous, the Dead Space trilogy, the Mass Effect trilogy, Dragon Guard 3, Dragon Age 2, the Motorstorm series, and Ashura's Wrath, whose DLC, mind you, holds the true ending, really, Capcom? And so on. That won't be accessible unless I look on specific sites that have a US/NTSC version of the game or DLC. And these games and DLC are just the ones I know of based on my collection and recommendations from others. There's so much more out there. So many games with art direction, stories, music, game mechanics, and ideas I'll never get to see or be inspired by because Sony doesn't care about preserving their library of content that they hold, and is only interested in preserving their bottom line. That's countless years of games and hours of work and effort just thrown down the drain for short-term profits. And on a side note, I do want to modify a PS3 Slim so that way I can play the games that I want to play with the DLC that I want to enjoy without giving Sony a couple $100 of my money. It's just, I own a Super Slim and I only have my potato of a laptop, so I'm kind of just working through that. If you guys want to help direct me towards a comprehensive set of instructions so that way I can get that level of accessibility, cool beans. But this is all to say I'm scared, on top of being royally pissed off. The reason being is I started collecting PlayStation 2 and 3 games in my late teens to early 20s, folks. I'm 27 now. I never got a PlayStation 2 or 3 for my 10th birthday from my parents. I didn't know anything existed outside of the Wii my grandmother got for me and my siblings for a while. I didn't know what an Xbox 360 was until my 11th birthday when my dad got it for me. Then when I turned 14, I thought the PlayStation 4 was the coolest thing ever. And when I started hitting my late teens and early 20s, when I bought my first PlayStation 3, I finally understood what I was missing. I never had the same gaming experiences as kids my age growing up. I didn't have friends who could come over and we could play the night away with SpongeBob SquarePants, Lights, Camera, Pants. Someone lending me a copy of Armored Core 2 and sparking my love for mecha early on. I never had a family member gift me a PS3 with Dark Souls or Mass Effect for my birthday or Christmas. I never got to experience the good, the bad, and the ultimately mediocre games with friends or family and build connections with people over our shared love or disdain for a title, or grow a fond understanding for it the same way everyone in their respective communities has done. I was always just running while out of breath, constantly trying to catch up to everyone while trying to understand why everyone liked, disliked, or felt indifferent to the games they played. Always feeling late to the party even if I managed to get in the door before it closed. What I'm most afraid of is when Sony finally ends support for the PS3 Store and discontinues making physical discs. Some kids will never know the joy of opening a new game on Christmas or their birthday, their friend lending that cool new game to them for the week, or doing whatever they want with the physical copy of the game given to them. Some random kid a few states over doesn't know what Tokyo Jungle is because Sony doesn't give a shit. That kid is probably wasting their birthday money or access to their parents' credit card on something like Five Nights at 6-7, the myriad of low-effort adult games that plague every digital storefront, some garbage AI-generated shooter or visual novel, or the 50th derivative clone of a successful indie hit, because Sony's marketing division has the collective brainpower of a bowl of mashed peas and can't expend the energy to shed light on titles they own or hold the licenses to that deserve recognition or praise for their art direction, mechanics, story, etc. And while that fear doesn't keep me awake at night, it does eat away at me. I know eventually my physical library will turn to dust. My consoles will gradually reach the point where they die completely, and their peripherals, tie-ins, add-ons, and whatever else will degrade or rot as time moves on. In a past conversation with one of my good friends, she made a good point that we continuously cling on to our physical games, our digital libraries, hoping to keep them preserved and well kept. And the inevitability is that soon enough, everything just fades away as the passage of time marches on. That no matter how hard we hold on to everything, it'll just slip through our fingertips at some point. And she's right, but that doesn't mean it's futile. It just means enjoying the games you have and giving others the opportunity to enjoy those same experiences before they gradually disappear. At the very least, the silver lining is people around the world are working to preserve most of the library of games that Sony is too careless or uncommitted to do themselves. And if you really want to stick it to them, don't buy a PS6 or any nostalgic titles. Revoke your PS Plus subscription if you haven't. Spend your hard-earned money somewhere other than the PS3 and current PlayStation Store. Buy physical discs secondhand, and help other people understand the resources to emulate and preserve games, their DLC, and any obscure titles that deserve a spotlight. Sony isn't immediately the victor of this war. And this whole shift to a digital-only storefront, it's not in Sony's favor or to their benefit. All it's going to prove is when something happens to the PlayStation Network and Sony can't give people back their accounts, they can't play their library of games offline, or reimburse everyone for the millions of digital libraries that were lost due to mismanagement and/or stupidity, that Sony can't be trusted to provide a quality service and deliver us quality games. We hold the power, folks. If Sony does something that we as a consumer base don't like or directly know goes against our best interests and buying habits, we have the ability to fight back, but we need to work together and make enough pushback against Sony so that the gaming industry can't take our accessibility from us. If they want to undermine us, take away our ability to enjoy physical media, or forcibly control our accessibility to quality games, give them hell. I'm scared, but that doesn't mean I won't do what I can to keep Sony from seeing a single cent of my money that I make to go into their pockets. I just have to remind myself that Sony doesn't deserve my sympathy and do my best to avoid buying them at every opportunity that I can from this point forward. I'm Mr. J, and if you'll excuse me, I'm going to save up for a PS3 Slim, learn how to jailbreak PS3 consoles, and grab the games I want, where I want, and the DLC for the games I own from a reputable source. Hasta la fuck you, Sony. Rest in piss, you greedy, short-sighted, and overconfident assholes. I'm gonna fire up my PS2 and play Kingdom Hearts that I own on disc, and you can't do shit about it.